Hi, I'm Renee Kuhlman, Senior Director in the Preservation Services and Outreach Department at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We sincerely appreciate your efforts to save historic places at the local, state, and federal levels. This video is a part of a series that's providing guidance to those advocating for historic preservation. Today, I'll be sharing ways that you can create and sustain effective advocacy coalitions. But first, a bit about me. For over 20 years, I've had the pleasure of working with coalitions across the country, putting in place, expanding, protecting state historic tax credits. These rehabilitation incentives, offered now by more than 36 states, help encourage private investment in our historic buildings. So coalitions are formed either to address a single policy or to save a historic place. And sometimes they're even more broad. They work to save a certain number of historic places, or they're developing a more formal joint policy agenda. But whether they are permanent or whether they're temporary, advocacy coalitions have one thing in common, and that's that they are action-oriented. So we know that working with a large group can be challenging. Does anybody remember those group projects we were assigned in school? However, preservation advocates have found that working together increases their chances of success. And that's because working with partners increases the coalition's stature in the eyes of decision makers and the public that they serve. It also lowers the cost for each coalition member by sharing expenses, whether you're hiring an architect or whether you're hiring a lobbyist or planning an event. Sharing the cost helps mean that everybody pays a little bit less. The adage, many hands make light work, is true when you share the burden of planning events, work with the media, and educate grassroots constituencies. By working together, you can create compelling messages that reach a larger and broader audience. You can also make new contacts that you might not have had before, and you can learn new advocacy techniques that are new to you, but maybe somebody else has been doing it for a long time. And finally, having coalitions can help increase awareness of community revitalization among the different members. So it's a great way to educate others about historic preservation. I want to share a success from my home state of West Virginia, where advocates saw the opportunity to compete with neighboring states to attract outside investment. The Revitalize West Virginia's Downtown Coalition successfully worked with their legislators to increase the state's historic tax credit from a 10% to a 20% credit. And the reason why they were successful? The initial 4 organizations grew eventually to include a coalition of 38 cities and their mayors, county executives, brownfield activists, business owners, local main streets, developers, and many, many more. Before creating or joining a coalition, you need to consider a lot of different ramifications. And first thing you need to do is identify potential coalition partners. The interdisciplinary nature of our work, both at Main Street and in preservation, means you have allies in many different fields. For example, chambers of commerce, housing advocates, and environmentalists all want to see revitalized downtowns for their own particular reasons. So, for example, it would lead to more locally owned businesses, which is, of course, of interest to chambers of commerce. Repurposing existing buildings means less carbon is being released into the atmosphere. And then, of course, if these newly renovated buildings are creating more housing units, then the housing advocates are also interested in this type of coalition. So while you're looking at this list of potential partners, and there are probably more that I didn't include, you want to understand that each coalition, each situation is very unique. And so the coalition that you build will be unique to that situation and also will likely change over time. So keep brainstorming as you go through the campaign about new partnership opportunities. Now, there will always be someone or some group opposed to your issue, your idea. But remember, these same people may be your allies down the road. So you don't want to burn bridges, even if you have disagreements. Also, as part of this series, our colleague Ross Bradford from the National Trust legal team shared what's permissible by representatives of local governments as well as local nonprofits. So before approaching possible coalition members, you want to consider the following questions. What would potential partners benefit? How would they benefit from participating in this campaign? Preservation in and of itself is not always an obvious benefit for a coalition partner. For example, you may need to explain why the revitalization of downtown commercial districts helps create high-wage local jobs, which in turn retains the local workforce. What is the reputation of the particular partner? You want to be thinking about that. And are you comfortable in being associated with this partner in the media? You also know that building coalitions takes time, and the work of the coalition takes time. So you need to be able to explain to the partner what the expected time commitment would be. And then you also want to be looking at what does the partner bring to the table? What can they contribute to the coalition? How often do they communicate with their advocates? How do they communicate with their advocates? Do they have a reputation for being effective? Do they have additional resources they could bring to the situation, whether it's financial or additional manpower? So you want to be thinking about those particular questions. But with your list of potential partners in hand, you want to think that it's often a simple phone call with the person in charge. You reach out to them, you explain what the goal of the coalition might be, whether or not they would be interested, and start to assess that relationship. But you also want to realize that sometimes a board level approval is needed before an organization can commit. And sometimes those decisions can take a long time. So you need to factor that into your planning. And then, of course, after you share your own reasons for being involved, you might want to think about reasons that they might want to be involved and to help them understand how this could benefit them. So the first steps of an effective coalition is to jointly identify the common goal or goals shared by all the coalition members. And sometimes you have to keep going up and up till you get to a broader goal that is achievable and of interest to all the coalition members. You then need to talk about the objectives and the tactics. It's better to talk about those ideas early to avoid misunderstandings later on. One thing you need to do is do some relationship mapping to determine who has the best contacts, the best skills, the best resources, and then divvy up the tasks accordingly. No task is really good unless you have a timeline and you clearly identify the responsibilities of each coalition member. Coalitions can get unwieldy if they're too large, so you might want to consider having different partnership levels where an organization could simply sign on and say, yes, I support this, or have others who are involved in the strategy making process. And then finally, you want to figure out a really great coalition name. I'm a fan of those that are not too fancy or too complicated to remember. I like plain language. But when you're using these coalition names, you want to figure out if the resulting acronyms are going to be favorable to the coalition. It's always something to keep in mind. So once you have your coalition established, you want to maintain its effectiveness. And I know this is going to sound very simple, But one of the best tools for keeping and sustaining an effective coalition is to have regular meetings, face-to-face if possible, but it's always great if somebody is taking the notes and reminding people after the meeting what was decided that somebody was going to do. The other part is to announce yourself. And I've seen this done in many different ways, as simple as a one-pager where they start off with a few members of the coalition, and as the support grows, the list grows longer. And they keep announcing that so you can see over time how the coalition is growing. Now, some coalitions may spend money to either hire a lobbyist or a public relations firm, or offer an educational workshop, or even have advocacy events. So if raising and spending money is the responsibility of the coalition, then I would suggest having a written document that describes how much each coalition member is contributing, how that money is going to be spent, and then what will be done with the remaining monies should the success happen more quickly than anticipated. And the same thing with any shortfalls. So I was mentioning the one pager earlier, and creating sort of team approved educational materials is a great activity of all effective coalitions. I think the most effective are those that use both statistics and stories and pictures. Preservation lends itself to great before and after pictures, or pictures showing how the work of preservation can activate a community and make it more vital. Another idea is to host joint events, and it's an opportunity to educate decision makers as well as other members of the public and your grassroots constituencies. So for example, the Missouri Main Street Connection hosts an annual Main Street Capitol Day in Jefferson City, and they help celebrate the achievements of local Main Streets, and then also share insights about the program's effectiveness with their state legislators. So legislators get to hear the reasons for supporting the program from a variety of constituents and in a variety of places within their state. I also think it's very important to engage the media, and there's a lot that can be said about how to engage the media, but it's one of the most important responsibilities undertaken by a coalition. You want to make sure that the materials released to the public have been cleared by all members of the coalition. Be sure to use everyone's logo so that people can quickly identify who's involved in the coalition. And I think it's important to identify sort of a general spokesperson that can speak to the media, but that every member of the media be using the same talking points so they can continually encourage the adoption of the understanding of the issue. When I got married, my dad stood up and gave a presentation as an educator, and he said, if one thing I've learned of being an educator is that you have to say something 7 times in order for people to remember it. And then he said, I want grandchildren, I want grandchildren, I want grandchildren 7 times. So it's very important to continually highlight the same message from many different folks. Learning from mistakes. I think it's always important after you undertake an activity to assess how you did, and having a coalition that has many different perspectives helps you quickly alter your tactics if they're not working. I don't think we share our successes enough, and I don't think we often take enough time to share the successes along the way. So, for example, in a state historic tax credit campaign, getting a bill introduced is huge. And I think that's an opportunity for the coalition to share its success with others, but also to take a moment to pat themselves on the back. I also think it's important to share credit among all the coalition partners. It offers the opportunity for everyone to take a moment and share the credit, and it builds a good coalition as well as being beneficial for others to understand the work that went into it. And then finally, remain in contact. If you've been successful in, let's say, expanding a state historic tax credit, chances are in the next few years, you're going to have to come back and continually educate new legislators as they come on and they have no experience with this particular policy. So keeping in touch with coalition members, even if the issue isn't present, knowing that they'll come around, and if not, there'll be another preservation issue right around the corner. So in conclusion, I want to say that successful advocacy coalitions take hard work, but as I've seen firsthand, the results are worth the investment of your time and your energy. So thank you very much.